In 740 AD, the ruler of the most powerful empire between China and Rome converted his entire kingdom to Judaism. Not Christianity, not Islam, Judaism. You never learned this in school, and the reason it was scrubbed from your textbooks is darker than the conversion itself. Someone needed you to forget the Khazars ever existed. The Khazar Khaganate ruled a territory larger than Western Europe. From the Caspian Sea to the Black Sea, from the Caucasus to the Volga River, they controlled every trade route that mattered. Silk, furs, slaves, gold. Every merchant moving between the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic Caliphate paid the Khazars for the privilege. They weren't a footnote, they were the gatekeeper of the medieval world. For over 300 years, 650 to 969 AD, the Khazars were a superpower, and then they vanished, not slowly. Not through natural decline, they were erased. The question is who did it and why they needed it to stay that way. The Khagan's name was Bulan. Around 740 AD, he summoned representatives of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. Each made their case. Each argued their faith was the truth. Bulan chose Judaism, not the faith of an empire, not the faith backed by armies and crowns. The faith of a persecuted, stateless minority. He converted his ruling class. His kingdom followed. This wasn't a fringe event. Byzantine records noted it. Arab geographers documented a Jewish kingdom in the Caucasus, a sovereign state that minted coins with Hebrew script, built synagogues on the steppe, and sent ambassadors to both the Caliphate and the papacy. A Jewish empire in the heart of medieval Eurasia with cavalry, tax collectors, and more territory than France. You've never heard of it. That's not an accident. And that's not even the strangest part. The Khazar conversion didn't just change one kingdom. It changed the map of an entire religion. When a kingdom converts, people move. Refugees scatter. And when the Khaganate fell to Sviatoslav of Rus in 969 AD, the Khazar people went somewhere. West. Into Eastern Europe. At exactly the same time, Ashkenazi Jewish communities begin appearing in Poland, Hungary, and Russia. No one can fully explain where they came from. The standard answer, westward migration from the Rhineland, doesn't survive the numbers. Medieval Germany had tens of thousands of Jews. Medieval Poland and Russia suddenly had millions, appearing almost overnight in exactly the territory where the Khazar Empire used to stand. But here's what doesn't add up. In 1976, Arthur Koestler, a serious writer, not a fringe theorist, published a book called The 13th Tribe. It laid out the Khazar ancestry thesis using documented, cited, mainstream historical sources. He wasn't debated, he was destroyed. His reputation was savaged. The book quietly disappeared from shelves. The thesis was labeled anti-Semitic, even though Koestler himself was Jewish. Think about that. Ask yourself why an ancestry theory, a historical, genealogical question, becomes politically radioactive. Theories don't get that treatment unless they threaten something much bigger than a theory. Here's what it threatened. The political legitimacy of a modern nation-state rested on one specific claim, that a people with an unbroken bloodline stretching back 3,000 years had an ancient right to return to a particular land. If a significant portion of those people were actually descended from Khazar converts, the Turkic nomads from the Caucasus who had never set foot in the Levant, then that ancestral claim changes. Not the moral case, not the humanitarian argument, the bloodline thread, that specific foundational thread, and no one in power wanted it pulled. Genetics eventually entered the room. In 2012, Iran Elhaik at Johns Hopkins published findings showing genetic markers in Ashkenazi populations consistent with Khazar origin. The study was immediately countered, dismissed, and buried before the journals were cold. The science is genuinely contested, but contested science gets examined. This got something different. It got labeled before the data was fully read. The Khazars were a real empire with real converts whose real descendants went somewhere real. Where they went, and how many of them there were, is a question that politics decided science was not allowed to answer. That's not scholarship. That's suppression. Here's what this means for everything else you've been told. If one ancestry narrative could be locked down this thoroughly, If a legitimate historical debate could be made radioactive with a single word, what else has been sealed off the same way? The Khazars didn't vanish because they were unimportant. They vanished because they were inconvenient. Because empires don't just conquer territory, they conquer the story of who belongs to it. Every time an expert tells you the debate is settled, ask who benefits from the debate being over. Ask what changes if the answer is different. You learned about the Franks. You learned about the Byzantines. You never learned about the empire that sat between them and controlled the entire trade network connecting East and West for 3 centuries. That wasn't an oversight. The 13th tribe remains out of print in most countries. Genetic research into Ashkenazi ancestry keeps getting contested, defunded, and quietly shelved. The Khazars stay buried, and the one question no historian in a funded institution will let the science fully answer: where exactly those millions of Eastern European Jews came from, and how fast is still open. When a history book stays buried, someone is keeping it there. Who decides which ancestry gets funding, and which one gets a label instead of an answer?